Kirk Cousins doesn't lose his temper. That's been the label on him for 14 seasons in this league. Polished, polite, the guy who says you like that and then goes back to sounding like a substitute teacher in post-game interviews. So when a Raiders practice video started ripping around social media this weekend, showing Cousins charging a teammate, shoving him in the chest, and grabbing a fistful of jersey, people noticed. The teammate on the other end of it was Maxx Crosby, the same Maxx Crosby who's made a career out of getting under quarterback skin, from Patrick Mahomes to Justin Herbert. Two leaders of the same locker room going face to face in front of everybody. That's where this story starts. The clip comes out of Henderson, Nevada, from a Raiders training camp practice this past Friday. It's the kind of video that wasn't supposed to travel outside the building. Practice reps, no scoreboard, no fans in the stands. But someone got it on their phone, and once it hit X, it didn't stop moving. Here's what's actually in the footage. Cousins is running with the first team offense during a team period. Maxx Crosby hit quarterback Kirk Cousins twice during the team period. When Crosby hit Cousins' arm a second time, the 15-year veteran had had enough. That's the trigger. Not a cheap shot, not a helmet-to-helmet hit, just a defensive end doing what defensive ends do, getting his hands up, tipping a pass, and catching the quarterback's arm on the follow-through, twice. And on the replay, you can see it happen in real time. Cousins appeared upset that Crosby tipped his pass, forcing an incompletion, and then charged the 6'5", 256-pound defensive end, who is 3 inches taller and 42 pounds heavier. Cousins doesn't hesitate. He doesn't complain to the officials, because there are no officials. He just goes, "What happens next is what made the footage worth watching twice." Cousins got into Crosby's face, grabbing the All-Pros jersey, while both exchanged words before it was broken up. Multiple outlets described the same sequence with slightly different details, which tells you how chaotic those few seconds actually were. One version has Cousins delivering a shove before the grab. Friday's altercation began when Cousins took exception to Crosby hitting him on the arm twice during the team period. After the second hit, Cousins confronted Crosby and grabbed his jersey. Another account from New York Post reporter Vincent Bonsignore, who was on the field that day, adds the physical piece that made the clip really pop online: the shove. Immediately after Crosby again made contact with Cousins' throwing arm following a pass, the quarterback charged toward him, delivered a not-so-subtle shove to the chest, and accompanied it with some choice words and a stern warning to knock it off, is how Bonsignore described it. So picture it. Cousins, 6'3", 37 years old. A guy who's thrown for over 44,000 career yards, doing it mostly from a clean pocket. Closing the distance on a 5-time Pro Bowler who's built like a linebacker with a defensive end's get-off. Crosby didn't back down either. Crosby responded by getting in Cousins' face. For a few seconds, this wasn't a quarterback getting protected by his line. This was two of the most important players on the Raiders roster nose to nose, barking, with nobody sure what was going to happen next. It didn't take long for the rest of the building to react. The two players then exchanged words before being separated. Teammates poured in from both sides of the ball, not to pick a side, just to pull them apart before punches started flying. And they succeeded mostly. Teammates quickly stepped in to separate the two leaders before anything escalated further. No punches were thrown, and practice continued. What's wild is what happened in the minutes right after. This wasn't a case where both guys got sent to the showers to cool off. Cousins, who is operating the first-team offense in training camp, remained on the field to finish the drive. Crosby, however, was sent to the sideline. The starting quarterback kept working. The 5-time Pro Bowl pass rusher got benched for the rest of the session. If you're trying to read the tea leaves on how the coaching staff viewed the incident in real time, that's about as clear a signal as you're going to get. The video quality isn't perfect. Most of these camp leaks come from fan-shot phone footage from behind a fence or from team-produced hype reels never meant for public release. But you don't need 4K resolution to see a franchise quarterback bum rush a $100 million pass rusher and grab him by the collar. That image alone was enough to make it the most discussed thing in the NFL on a random Friday in August. Preseason games not even underway yet. And once it went up, it wasn't just fans arguing about who won the scuffle. The players around Cousins and Crosby started talking. Reporters in the building started filing stories within the hour. The head coach got asked about it before he'd even left the practice field. That's the part of this story that turns a 15-second clip into a genuine multi-day saga. Because everybody in that building, and plenty of people who used to be in that building, had something to say about it. To understand why this clip hit as hard as it did, you have to understand who these two guys are supposed to be. Start with Cousins. Kirk Cousins has long carried a reputation as one of the NFL's more mild-mannered quarterbacks. This is a guy whose signature viral moment before this week was a corny sideline speech about "you like that," the kind of thing that got turned into t-shirts and memes precisely because it was so unthreatening. He spent over a decade in Washington, then Minnesota, then a brief stop in Atlanta, building a reputation as steady, cerebral, a film room guy rather than a locker room instigator. Kirk Cousins joined the Raiders in April on a 5-year, $172 million deal. Cousins started his journey with Washington in 2012. In 2018, he joined the Vikings before signing a 4-year, $180 million deal with the Falcons in 2024. The quarterback has posted 44,700 yards and 298 TDs passing in 14 seasons. 14 years, 3 different franchises, hundreds of millions of dollars in contracts, and almost none of it built on an image of physical confrontation. That's exactly why Friday's practice hit different. That image took a hit Friday during Las Vegas Raiders practice, when a guy known for game-managing efficiency suddenly starts throwing shoves at his own teammate. That's not background noise. That's the story. Now flip to the other side of the collision. Maxx Crosby doesn't have an image problem because his entire brand is built on exactly this kind of intensity. It doesn't matter the time of year or the opponent. Las Vegas Raiders star pass rusher Maxx Crosby knows how to get under people's skin. He's a 5-time Pro Bowler, one of the most productive pass rushers of his generation. And along the way, he's built a well-earned reputation for playing every single rep like it's a playoff game, whether it's a Sunday in December or a Tuesday walkthrough in July. That reputation has burned him before, most memorably a few years back against the Rams. Crosby and Akers fought along the Rams' sideline at the end of a play during a team period. It looked as if Crosby tried to knock the ball out after they were both out of bounds, and Akers took offense to it. Punches were thrown, and both teams poured onto the field to break up the two combatants. Crosby didn't apologize for it afterward either. "I was just doing what I do," Crosby said. He didn't like that, so he got what he got. That's Crosby in a sentence. An edge rusher who treats every practice period like it's live action and lets the other guy decide how mad to get about it. It's not just running backs he's rattled either. He's gotten under the skin of Patrick Mahomes himself, one of the most controlled competitors in the league. During a Chiefs-Raiders matchup, Crosby's constant chirping led to Mahomes losing his composure mid-game, screaming at him after their helmets collided. As a result, the Chiefs quarterback lost his cool and lashed out at the Raiders star, yelling at him as their helmets collided. Mahomes later admitted on camera that his frustration that day just boiled over the moment Crosby got in his space. Even Andy Reid, a coach who generally lets his players' emotions run, had to step in and settle Mahomes down. So this is a guy with a track record. Coaches don't just tolerate Crosby's aggression, they actively try to manage it, because it's proven itself capable of setting off some of the calmest players in football. Heading into this camp, that management effort was explicit. Before the start of training camp, Crosby revealed how he was given a guideline by Clint Kubiak and the coaching staff to tone down his intensity during practice. "I just can't tell you how many people have come up to me already and just been like, 'All right, so at practice, you can't do this,'" Crosby said. He even admitted the tension in his own game. "I practice one way. I know that I push the line, and sometimes I go over the line." He'd literally been warned, days before camp opened, that hitting the quarterback was the exact kind of thing that would get him in trouble. There's also a physical piece worth understanding, because it explains why a shove from Cousins looked as dramatic as it did on video. Crosby isn't just aggressive. He's enormous for his position and enormous relative to Cousins. He stands 3 inches taller than the quarterback and outweighs him by more than 40 pounds. That size gap is part of what made the footage so jarring. This wasn't a fair fight in any physical sense. It was a guy who throws footballs for a living squaring up to a guy built to bull rush 300-pound tackles. And there's context on Crosby's side that makes this camp especially charged for him personally. He wasn't walking into this training camp fresh. Maxx Crosby returned to training for the first time since December. He suffered a torn meniscus that required surgery. He'd spent the offseason rehabbing his knee, trying to prove he was back to full speed. And on top of the injury, his offseason had already been an emotional roller coaster before he ever got to camp. Crosby is back in Las Vegas after a blink, and you'll miss it nearly trade to Baltimore. The Raiders initially traded him to the Ravens in March, but Baltimore sent him back after medical concerns emerged during his physical. Traded, then untraded, all inside of a few weeks. That's the kind of offseason that leaves a guy with something to prove. And Crosby has never needed extra motivation to play with an edge in the first place. Meanwhile, Cousins wasn't walking into a stable situation either. He arrived in Vegas as a bridge, a proven veteran brought in to stabilize a quarterback room. That also happens to include the most important rookie on the roster. His job is to serve as the bridge, starting quarterback, taking first-team reps and providing stability while the team's young high-draft rookie quarterback develops. The team wanted a proven, experienced leader under center to manage the offense early in the season. By locking in Cousins as the primary starter to open camp, the coaching staff can safely ease their young rookie quarterback into the system. That rookie is Fernando Mendoza, the Heisman winner the Raiders used the top overall pick on. And every practice rep Cousins takes is, in some sense, an audition to keep the job. Every incompletion, every batted pass, every moment where he looks anything less than in control carries just a little more weight than it would for a guy with no competition breathing down his neck. So you had two players walking into this camp under real pressure. One trying to prove his knee and his trade value were both fine. The other trying to prove his arm and his leadership were still worth the money. And they collided on a random Friday period. Neither one of them backed down when it happened. And that's exactly the collision the footage captured. Part 3. The locker room reacts. Kubiak, Mayer, and the two leaders line. Once the dust settled on the practice field, the next chapter of this story happened in the interview room, and it was almost as interesting as the fight itself. Head coach Clint Kubiak was asked about the scuffle before he'd even walked off the field, and his answer set the tone for how the entire organization would talk about it publicly. He didn't scold either player by name. He didn't call it a problem. Those are two leaders of our team going at it. So that is part of camp, Coach Clint Kubiak said. That's a coach essentially validating the fire instead of condemning it, framing a shoving match between his starting quarterback and his best defensive player as a sign of competitive spirit rather than a discipline issue. But Kubiak wasn't just shrugging it off completely either. He drew a clear line about where that fire needs to stop. Obviously, if you fight in a game and throw a punch in game, then you're out of the game. So we've got to be smart and treat it like a game. Translation: scuffle in practice, fine. That's competitive juice. Throw a punch in a real game, and you're costing the team 15 yards and possibly an ejection. Kubiak wanted his players to understand that emotional line without losing the emotion that produces it in the first place. That distinction mattered enough that the very next day, Kubiak backed his words with actual consequences. Both players were held out of practice on Saturday for violating team rules. Raiders coach Clint Kubiak, who informed reporters of his decision to sideline Crosby and Cousins, said that both players will take part in Monday's practice. So it wasn't just talk. Cousins and Crosby, arguably the two most important non-rookie names on that roster, both watched from the sideline as their teammates ran team drills without them. We have very clear expectations on how we want to practice and how we want to go about our business, and we violated that yesterday. Kubiak told reporters and made clear he wasn't going to elaborate much beyond that. The benching had a real visible consequence on the field. With the two of them out, the door opened for someone else. As a result, top pick Fernando Mendoza played with the first-team offense. Think about that for a second. The rookie the Raiders are trying to bring along slowly got an unscheduled bump to first-team reps because the presumed starter and the best pass rusher on the roster were both serving a timeout. And by all accounts, Mendoza made the most of it. Mendoza had a solid morning while playing with the starters. He had a few off-target throws and had issues with the snap a couple of times, but responded well. He threw a pair of touchdowns to Trey Tucker and Brock Bowers during the red zone period. During the 2-minute period to wrap up practice, Mendoza completed 5 straight passes to set up a field goal. A rookie quarterback doesn't usually get a red zone showcase like that in the middle of camp, but a training camp scuffle handed him exactly that opportunity. It's also worth noting Cousins and Crosby weren't the only pair throwing hands that Friday. The Crosby-Cousins scuffle was one of 2 altercations that took place during Friday's practice. Down in the trenches, tempers flared separately. Defensive tackle Jonah Laulu and guard Caleb Rogers got into a fight Friday as well. However, both players participated in practice Saturday. Notice the difference in punishment there. Laulu and Rogers were back at it the next day, while Cousins and Crosby sat out. That tells you the coaching staff viewed the quarterback and star pass rusher scuffle as the one that actually needed a cooling off period, even if Kubiak's public words downplayed it. Beyond the coach, teammates weighed in too, and their tone leaned almost entirely toward approval. Tight end Michael Mayer, who's caught passes from Cousins all camp, was blunt about wanting to see exactly this kind of edge from his quarterback. "You want him to defend your team," tight end Michael Mayer said of Cousins. "He's always had that edge since the first day I met him when he came in here." That's a teammate essentially saying, "This isn't new. This is who Cousins actually is underneath the calm exterior, and we're glad to see it come out." Mayer didn't stop there. He framed the whole thing as something the team almost needed. "It's energy, man," Mayer said. "We don't want to be throwing punches, but I think on any padded day of camp, there's going to be some scuffles." And in a separate interview, he made the stakes even clearer, tying Cousins' aggression directly to the kind of quarterback the Raiders need heading into the season. "That's our starting quarterback right now, and you want him to defend your team. And you want him to have some edge to him, which he does. He's always had since the first day I met him when he came in here." But even Mayer wanted boundaries respected. "I don't want him getting thrown out. I don't want him getting a flag." In other words, keep the fire, lose the penalty. There's a bigger picture reason this framing from the locker room mattered so much. This wasn't just about pride. It was about an offense that had gotten physically dominated the year before. One report tied the incident directly to that history. While Crosby's aggressive nature is well documented, Cousins' actions on Friday were an insight into his competitive spirit. It may also serve as a rallying cry for a Raiders offense that was pushed around far too often in 2025. So inside the building, this wasn't treated purely as an embarrassing viral clip. It was treated, at least partly, as evidence the new quarterback wasn't going to let his group get bullied again. Crosby, for his part, didn't spend much time addressing the Cousins incident specifically in public, but his general comments about his practice habits throughout camp lined up with everything everyone already knew about him. A guy who plays the same way regardless of the stakes, whether it's a padded practice or a playoff game, and who accepts the consequences that come with it. Once the footage escaped the practice bubble, the conversation didn't stay confined to Raiders beat writers. It became a full-blown NFL Twitter event, complete with jokes, hot takes, and at least one former teammate throwing his full-throated support behind Cousins. That former teammate was Will Compton, a linebacker who spent years in the same building as both players and had rare, personal knowledge of exactly how each of them operates. Compton played alongside Cousins for 4 seasons back in Washington and also suited up for the Raiders himself, giving him a real relationship with Crosby too. Knowing both of these guys, Kirk Cousins would beat the tattoos off of Maxx Crosby. Former Raider Will Compton posted on X. Compton played with Cousins for 4 years when they were with the Washington Redskins. He didn't just have a passing opinion, he built a real relationship with both men. Compton also played for the Raiders in 2019 and 2021 seasons, where he built a dynamic with Maxx Crosby. The line went everywhere. Every outlet covering the NFL that weekend ran some version of the tattoos comment, because it was the kind of quote that turned a serious moment into something people could laugh about, while still respecting what had actually happened on that practice field. And people had opinions about whether Compton was even right. It was already a little uncharacteristic to see Cousins let his frustration get the best of him. To suggest he'd take things that far with Crosby is also borderline baffling. It's not to say that Cousins couldn't, but it just doesn't seem like his personality to go to that extent. But Compton's comment wasn't a one-off joke pulled out of nowhere. He's needled Crosby publicly before in lighter moments, showing the two have an ongoing rapport that makes his tattoos line land as ribbing between friends rather than a random shot from a stranger. He's also been on record heaping praise on Crosby as a player, calling him the embodiment of the franchise's identity in an earlier interview, which makes the joke read less like an insult and more like exactly the kind of trash talk two guys who respect each other would throw around. The general public reaction wasn't nearly as balanced. Regular fans picked a side fast, and it wasn't Crosby's. Crosby low-key a douchebag, he's an idiot. NFL fans rip Maxx Crosby for hitting Kirk Cousins and getting into heated scuffle at Raiders camp. That's the temperature of the online conversation in a nutshell. A good chunk of fans framed Crosby as the aggressor who brought this on himself by hitting the quarterback's arm not once but twice, disregarding the very warning he'd been given by his own coaching staff about exactly that behavior days earlier. At the same time, there was a competing thread of fans and analysts who saw the whole thing as harmless, even good, for a team that's been looking for an edge. The idea that Cousins showing physicality was a positive sign, not a red flag, showed up across multiple outlets covering the story. One outlet summed up the mood plainly. There's certainly nothing wrong with Cousins showing a little fire, as long as it doesn't lead to something bad, which did not happen here. Training camp fights between teammates are the norm at this time of year, and this amounts to a very tame version. It's worth remembering, too, that this wasn't some isolated, never-before-seen event for the Raiders specifically. Crosby has a documented history of drawing quarterbacks and skill players into these moments. He mixed it up with Cam Akers during a joint practice against the Rams years back, an incident that got both players sent off the field for the day under a zero-tolerance policy from the opposing coach. McVay said there is a zero-tolerance policy for fighting during these practices. If you do that, you're out, McVay said. He's also been the center of controversy in real games, including a hit on an injured Justin Herbert that drew criticism from fans, even if the Chargers' own stars downplayed it afterward. All of that history fed directly into how quickly people online were willing to cast Crosby as the instigator in this new footage, regardless of whether Cousins escalated things physically once contact was made. And that's really the crux of what made this particular scuffle catch fire the way it did compared to Crosby's other run-ins. It wasn't a running back or an opposing quarterback responding to him. It was his own guy, the quarterback he's supposed to be protecting, finally snapping back. Fans who'd watched Crosby get away with pushing the line for years suddenly got to see someone inside his own building refuse to let it slide, and that novelty is a big part of why the clip spread as fast as it did. By the time the punishment was handed down and the internet had finished picking sides, the actual football stakes of this whole thing came back into focus, and they're real ones. Kubiak made it clear from the jump that this wasn't going to turn into a lasting rift. Raiders coach Clint Kubiak said both players will practice Monday. The team is off Sunday. No suspension beyond the single day. No trade rumors attached to the incident itself. No reports of the two of them refusing to speak to each other. Even on the disciplinary day itself, they were still doing team activities side by side. Cousins and Crosby stretched with the team and participated in individual drills Saturday, but they remained on the sideline during the 11-on-11 period. That's a pretty clear message from the organization. They wanted the specific competitive period they disrupted to go on without them, but they weren't being frozen out of the team entirely. Kubiak's closing comments on the whole saga were about as tidy a wrap-up as you'll get from an NFL coach trying to move past a story, before it becomes a full season-long narrative. That's all I'm going to say about it. We addressed it with the team, and we're moving on. Short, controlled, no further fuel added to the fire. That's exactly the kind of answer designed to let a viral clip die down within a news cycle or two, rather than following the team into the regular season. But some things about this moment aren't going away just because the coach wants to move on. The quarterback competition that's been simmering underneath this whole camp didn't disappear. If anything, this incident poured a little gasoline on it. Kubiak has been careful all camp about how he frames the QB room, insisting there isn't open hostility between his veteran and his rookie. Number 1 overall pick Fernando Mendoza will compete with Kirk Cousins, not competing against each other for Raiders' job. Yet Mendoza's sharp performance during his surprise start on Saturday is exactly the kind of tape that fuels speculation regardless of how the coaching staff wants to frame it. Kubiak has been candid that the starting job, even with Cousins as the presumed guy, isn't guaranteed to stay that way all season. Cousins likely will be the starter when the season begins. But even then, Kubiak has made no promises. The Raiders are expected to turn to Mendoza at some point this season. So every rep matters for Cousins right now. In a very literal sense, every incompletion he throws, every batted pass, every physical confrontation, all of it is happening under a microscope while a Heisman winner waits in the wings. That's part of why his reaction to Crosby's second deflection landed the way it did. It wasn't just an ordinary quarterback protecting his pride. It was a guy fighting for job security, letting his frustration boil over in front of the entire building, in a camp where every rep is being scrutinized for signs of who deserves the keys to the offense. For Crosby, the stakes run in a slightly different direction. He's coming off knee surgery, trying to prove to everyone, his coaches, his teammates, and maybe himself, that the explosiveness that makes him one of the most disruptive pass rushers in football is still fully there. Getting benched for a portion of practice because he couldn't dial back that same explosiveness against his own quarterback is a strange kind of confirmation. The aggression is definitely back. Managing it is still a work in progress. Exactly as he admitted himself before camp even started when he talked about pushing the line and sometimes going over it. There's also the franchise-level stakes sitting quietly underneath all of this. The Raiders are trying to rebuild an identity after a rough stretch, and Kubiak is brand new to the head job, running his first live competitive stretch as the man in charge. The Raiders are set to open their preseason against the Arizona Cardinals on Thursday. New head coach Clint Kubiak will get his first opportunity to see his team in a live competitive atmosphere outside of training camp. How he handled this scuffle, publicly praising the leadership fire while privately docking both players a day of reps, is basically a preview of how he plans to run his whole locker room going forward. Reward the competitiveness, punish the loss of discipline, and try not to let either extreme define the team's identity. As for Cousins and Crosby themselves, all the reporting agrees on one thing. Whatever tension flared up in that team period wasn't the kind that lingers. They were back on the same practice field together within 48 hours, going through drills, getting ready for an actual season where they need each other to be at their best. Cousins needs Crosby's pass rush to take pressure off an offense that struggled to hold up last year. And Crosby needs Cousins to be decisive enough with the football that the defense isn't constantly bailing out mistakes. If anything, the moment on Friday, however it looked on video, ended up being a strange kind of introduction between two new teammates, figuring out where each other's lines are. Neither one blinked when it mattered, and by all accounts, that earned both of them a bit of respect from the room around them rather than costing them any. The footage is still out there, still getting clipped and reposted, still drawing jokes about tattoos and shoves and who'd actually win a real fight. But inside the Raiders building, the story already moved on to the next practice, the next rep, the next chance for both of these guys to show whether Friday was a spark that fizzled out or the start of something that carries into the season.